It's spring in New York, and a new initiative is blossoming from the Clooney Foundation for Justice, which was co-founded by George and Amal Clooney to advocate for justice and advance accountability for human rights abuses around the world. Amal Clooney is a visiting professor at Columbia Law School, so it was the perfect venue to launch TrialWatch. It's a global initiative that aims to train and deploy monitors in courtrooms to be able to identify cases with due process violations.
Welcome to our 7-hour conference. Hope you're all ready. Hi. It's not a surprise to anybody that the world is becoming increasingly authoritarian, and authoritarian leaders are increasingly using the courts to consolidate power. Now, although the judiciary is often the best protection against abuses of power, compliant or corrupt judges can also be a tool to stifle dissent and oppress minorities. Yet little is known about the human rights abuses unraveling in the courts.
I have seen such sinister prosecutions in my practice as a barrister as well. I saw it in the Maldives, where my client, the former president, was imprisoned on false charges following a trial in which 2 of the judges had been witnesses for the prosecution. I saw it in Ukraine, where the president handpicked the judge who would try my client, his rival, Yulia Tymoshenko, and we now know paid Paul Manafort and a major US law firm millions of dollars to whitewash the trial as fair. I saw it in Egypt, where my client was part of the staff of Al Jazeera in Cairo, who was convicted on fake news charges simply because they had video editing software on their laptops. I've seen it in Azerbaijan, where the authorities installed a video camera in the bedroom of my client, a female journalist, and then accused her of absurd financial crimes like illegal entrepreneurship after she exposed corruption by the president. And I see it now in Myanmar, where my clients are Pulitzer Prize-winning Reuters journalists who languish in prison after they reported on the massacre of Rohingya Muslims in Rakhine State. Without the fair administration of justice, it is not possible to hold the powerful to account. There can be no democracy, no freedom of speech, no safety for minorities. And yet, we measure corruption by governments, but not by courts. We monitor the fairness of elections, but not trials. And leaders accused of holding political prisoners can get away all too easily with bare denials or stock answers about the separation of powers. We need extensive monitoring, hard data, and committed advocacy if this is to change.
The launch featured a day of panel discussions and brought together human rights organizations, including IOHR, top legal minds from both sides of the Atlantic, law students, and those who suffered persecution and imprisonment after biased trials. Key TrialWatch partners were also in attendance, including President of the American Bar Association, Bob Carlson, and President of Microsoft, Brad Smith, who was proud to premiere the app they have developed to support TrialWatch monitors in court.
We are working with Microsoft to develop the app that monitors will use in the courtroom.
Amal and George brought this great focus on the need to make trials fairer. And it was clear that technology needed to be part of the solution.
One of the innovations of the project is to bifurcate the role of the monitor and the person doing the assessment. So the person doing the assessment can be an international lawyer, but we can use local people on the ground to do the monitoring. And they don't have to be lawyers, as long as they go through our training programs.
TrialWatch has already begun monitoring trials and training monitors to index information that legal experts would then review to rate countries on the fairness of their judicial systems.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, we live at a time when human rights are increasingly under attack and judicial institutions are being instrumentalized for political ends. We also witness growing violence against activists, lawyers and journalists, and a shrinking space for civil society. For these reasons, the launch of TrialWatch is especially timely. I commend the Clooney Foundation for undertaking this project in close partnership with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Indeed, to uphold human rights, we need robust, transparent, and well-functioning institutions capable of preserving their independence and ensuring fair trials. And we also need to raise awareness about human rights and empower individuals to claim them. I wish you every success with this important initiative. Thank you.
To what extent, so you can shine a light, but are dictatorial governments really going to care? And just this week we saw Saudi Arabia execute, I think, 37 people, and one was crucified. Now, this was not something that investigative journalists dug out. This was something their Interior Ministry announced. And so in this context, in this age, when governments are often quite happy to send a message to try to suppress dissent, suppress journalism, then is that light that you shine on unfair trials, is it actually going to help get people free?
Well, I would start by turning it back on you and say the same thing about journalism. Your job is to shine a light on things. So the idea of absence of journalism, it only gets worse. The argument would be as opposed to what? As opposed to not monitoring the trials? I do understand the question, and I it is a dangerous time right now, but I also feel like it's this is a necessary step.
I think all of us have to do what we can to raise the cost of this kind of behavior. So through this initiative, it's one component. And I think the idea is, and we've seen this already with some of our pilot monitoring, you place a monitor in the courtroom, the judge knows they're being watched, and somehow that trial is handled differently than all the other cases that day in that courtroom. So the first line of attack is, can you shame the judge? If you can't shame the judge, maybe you can shame the government. If you can't shame that government, maybe you can shame other governments who are doing trade deals or giving other forms of assistance. And if you can't do that, then maybe you can get to businesses and affect their bottom line in terms of investment. And if you still fail, then you have to think about the mechanisms. The UK and Canada has just launched an initiative on media freedom. There's a number of things that governments, well-meaning governments in this space, can do, like adopting sanctions against governments who crack down on journalists and others, or having investigative teams that can be deployed when a journalist is violently attacked. So each entity has a role to play, but I think for TrialWatch, we at least want to be shining a spotlight on what's happening with courtrooms, because at the moment, it's incredibly easy for governments to get away with this kind of behavior. That's why they're using trials, because it gives them a way to silence dissent and yet have a veil of legitimacy. That's why they bother with the trial. They don't just throw someone in prison and without any kind of alleged process. So the openness of the courts is our opportunity.
Notable speakers at the event shone a light on what TrialWatch could bring to counter the unprecedented war on press freedom, after Reporters Without Borders announced that 2018 was marked as the worst year for journalists on record, with a total of 80 murdered, 348 imprisoned, and a further 60 taken hostage. Maria Ressa is one of the most highly regarded journalists in the Philippines and founder of Rappler, an online news platform that has grown into the fourth biggest news website in the Philippines. She's currently facing criminal charges and was among the journalists named Time Person of the Year in 2018.
We have 11 cases in 14 months, and everything that I've gone through. 11 cases in 14 months, posting bail 8 times, arrested twice in 5 weeks, and it's insane that it's gone this far, right? But somebody watching closely, shining the light during the judicial process makes it much harder. Every time there's a light, people behave in far more responsible, civilized manner. There is individual accountability. I think what happens now in the Philippines will be Filipinos' individual battles for integrity. Who are we? Do we really believe in human rights? Do we believe it is okay to kill? Right? It is a battle for the soul of our country, and it's a battle that I hope the good side will win.
It would have helped me immeasurably if international monitors, TrialWatch, were able to come into to my courtroom. There was absolutely no transparency in my case. There was no even pretense of due process. With a closed-door trial, and no legal representation, no representation from the media. Although I was working for the Washington Post and my case was so well known, the court could really have its way with me and then report whatever they felt like about the proceedings. And an initiative like TrialWatch, once it takes hold, makes that impossible.
We sometimes succeed to know the official charges, but in fact, what happens in the court is absolutely key. I can testify because I sometimes personally monitor trials, that sometimes very crazy things happen. If the world would know, it would help us to influence the judges. Not that the judges should comply with what NGOs say, but they should be independent from the governments in the countries where there are really press freedom predators.
You know, one of the things that I take away from today, having heard people who were behind bars speak out, is, you know, apathy is the enemy, and we need people to be angry and to care. And if you go to trialwatch.org, you will see a Get Involved button. And that doesn't mean send money. It actually means tell us about trials that you're worried about. It means volunteer to be a monitor. You know, get involved because you care about the issues, and maybe you care about one type of case or one country, but we care about all of them, so please help us make this a success.
Yeah, I would also say, just my takeaway from today, we had all these panels, and we were with President Nasheed, who spent time in jail for telling the truth, and Mohamed Fahmy, who also spent time in jail for telling the truth, and Jason Rezaian, who spent time in jail for telling the truth. Maria is, where is she? She's
there.
Oh, there, Maria is going back to the Philippines. She's been arrested twice in the last 5 weeks. The rest of you are out. Maria's about to risk going back, and she's going back because she believes that shining a light on crime, shining a light in general, is the best and most important thing, and she won't be afraid. I'm afraid for her, and all of us here are so proud of your ability to shine a light, and we're all going to do everything we can to make sure it stays loud for you.